I call Fletcher Tabato.
Thank you for the opportunity, sir. There are three main policy aims in this bill, and I'd like to focus on the last one. That is the elements related to the foreign trusts and tax jurisdiction. But first, and it's unusual with the new Minister of Revenue, but I'd like to concur with some of the statements he made in his address to the House, and I'm well pleased to see he is pleased of it. But I would like to support what the government is saying with regard to the provisional tax system. I've only just realised that Labor called for it, the Greens called for it, well, New Zealand First called for it years ago as well. So there's a lot of common sense, running through the House, and the government picked up on it. It's a great thing, and we do support that. The support is somewhat tempered by the obscene sums of money that the government's having to spend in terms of the IRD upgrades, ICT capabilities. We're talking sums in the billions of dollars, Mr. Speaker. But as to how often the case is that these omnibus bills come up, especially with regard to tax, it's a great frustration of mine in particular, but for New Zealand First, of course, that these omnibus bills cover such distinct and varied pieces of policy. So whilst I would love to stand up and support the government with this bill with regard to streamlining business operation in terms of their tax obligations, helping them with provisional tax obligations, because I think that's sensible, the third part of this bill, sir, is an abomination. It's an abomination to this House, and it is an insult to the people of New Zealand. And so, of course, this is where I would like to spend my time. And I apologise for this long quote from a business magazine from overseas, but if you give me some leeway, Mr. Speaker. When New Zealand Prime Minister John Key flew into Malta for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in November 2015, he already knew he shared some important views with his host, Malta's Prime Minister Joseph Muscat, about the importance of keeping the tax secrets of foreign investors. Both countries are quiet achievers in the ranks of global tax havens, and both are determined to keep it that way. While Malta has been fiercely resisting pressure to close tax avoidance loopholes used by foreign companies, including Australian firms, to move profits out of the EU, New Zealand has fought just as hard to protect its laws that make foreign profits tax-free and invisible for beneficiaries of its offshore trusts. Mr. Speaker, this is not a perception around the world. This is the reality as the world sees it. We are a haven and we are being abused. It is described by many as an opportunity for corrupt politicians, organised criminals, fraudsters, bribe payers, arms dealers and terrorists to use New Zealand's loose regulatory framework. New Zealand's 12,000 plus offshore trusts pay no New Zealand tax on foreign earnings. Their beneficiaries are not registered and their accounts are not filed with any public body, Mr. Speaker. New Zealand regulators may demand this information, if so requested, but it is not disclosed to foreign governments. And yet, Mr. Woodhouse, the Prime Minister, rejects claims New Zealand is a tax haven. To quote the Prime Minister, our tax settings are relatively robust by international standards, but we're always open to considering changes if they're warranted. The release of tax haven records underline the ease with which even corporates and individuals can use New Zealand to hide their wealth, Mr. Speaker. Even Mr. Shewan in his report said, "It is reasonable to conclude that illicit funds are being hidden in New Zealand foreign trusts." That is a direct quote, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Shewan wouldn't state it outright, but given his terms of reference did not include actually looking at the Panama Papers, he could only make that assumption. He may have described the terms of reference in his preface to the report as broad and comprehensive, but New Zealand First said at the time they weren't broad enough. And what we're seeing here today bears that out, Mr. Speaker. For example, although, actually, to be fair, Mr. Shewan did come down quite hard on the government's lack of action in terms of transparency. And so there was a few statements there made by Mr Shewan, which was embarrassing to the government. Mr Shewan's inquiry noted that foreign trusts are legitimate... this is a quote from Mr English. Mr Shewan's inquiry noted that foreign trusts are legitimate vehicles and that New Zealand's tax treatment of foreign trusts is appropriate. That's what Mr English got from the inquiry. That was it. And yet the inquiry concludes that the existing foreign trust disclosure rules are inadequate. And then he goes on to say the rules are not enough to protect New Zealand's international reputation, sir. Let's be clear for the members of the House. New Zealand First is dead tired, so tired of this national government's half measures when it comes to legislation, sir. Half measures on the housing crisis, half measures on regional development, half measures on transport infrastructure, half measures on our social infrastructure, half measures on just looking after small New Zealand business in terms of the uneven playing field they have to play in with regards to their GST and tax obligations when compared to their overseas competitors. It's all about half measures and spin, and it's beyond frustrating, sir. This bill with regard to foreign trusts is yet another half measure. It doesn't even go halfway, I put it to you, sir. Let's be absolutely clear. The response in this legislation is completely inadequate. And I use the European Union to measure how inadequate this response is. New Zealand's tax regime will come under investigation as Europe prepares a blacklist of global tax havens. And guess what, Mr Speaker? New Zealand and that national government will be on that list. It is looking all over the world, and it has confirmed that New Zealand will be investigated. What? No. They will investigate us, Mr Woodhouse. Let's be realistic. The Prime Minister's pet industry has been put under the spotlight. Mr Woodhouse has said the formal investigation may not take place, but we know that the EU is now looking at us very, very closely, and they've put us under a microscope. And right now, without a free trade agreement, without those magic free trade agreements that this government likes to make up, they're our third largest trading partner. So it's pretty critical that our relationship with the EU is on the up and up. Here's the kicker. New Zealand does not comply. Even with the recommendations made by Shewan, even if those are implemented, and not even all of those are implemented in here. For example, no tax exemption of foreign income. New Zealand will not meet the standard. They want an automatic exchange of information with foreign tax authorities and the jurisdictions where the settlers and beneficiaries are resident. Reported, New Zealand will not meet the standard. They want a public register of trust ownership and details. New Zealand will not meet the standard even after this legislation is written. We're facing scrutiny, at the very least, from those that we would like to sign a free trade deal with. New Zealand First would like to be able to support parts of this bill, as I said, Mr Speaker. There are good aspects to it that we think the Select Committee should investigate and expand on further. But because this is less than a half measure in protecting our reputation, in ensuring that this country does not support thieves and robbers from around the world, New Zealand First cannot even endorse this piece of legislation, even at this stage, because it is not an honest attempt, and I suggest to the Minister that he come back with a full and comprehensive and honest go at solving our problem with tax havens. Thank you, Mr Speaker.